At 4:50 in the morning on February 21, 1943, Brigadier General Paul Robinette stood in a shallow wadi 20 miles east of Tebessa, Tunisia, watching German panzers mass for an attack he knew would come within hours. The panzers belonged to General Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, the man who had driven British armies across North Africa for 2 years. Rommel had just spent 3 days smashing American forces through Kasserine Pass. Now he was coming for Tebessa, the main Allied supply base. If he took it, he would cut off thousands of American troops and capture enough fuel and ammunition to sustain his Africa Corps for months. Robinette commanded Combat Command B of the 1st Armored Division. He had 48 Sherman tanks, 31 tank destroyers, 3 infantry battalions, and 11 artillery batteries. Against him, Rommel was bringing the 10th Panzer Division, elements of the 21st Panzer, and the Italian Centauro Armored Division. Maybe 120 tanks total, plus mechanized infantry and artillery. The numbers were close, the experience was not. Rommel had been fighting in North Africa since February 1941. His troops had won battles at Gazala, Tobruk, and dozens of smaller engagements. They knew the desert. They knew mobile warfare. They knew how to coordinate tanks, infantry, and artillery into combined arms attacks that had broken British formations repeatedly. The Americans had been in combat for exactly 9 days. Most had never seen a German soldier before February 14th. Most had never been under artillery fire. Most had never watched their friends die. Rommel knew this. 3 days earlier, before the attack began, he had written in his journal that the Americans were untested, poorly led, and would break easily under pressure. His staff shared this assessment. German intelligence reports described American units as disorganized, their commanders as inexperienced, their equipment as adequate but poorly employed. The Germans expected an easy fight. They had been right for 72 hours. Now they were about to be proven wrong.
The first American unit Rommel destroyed was Combat Command A of the 1st Armored Division at Sidi Bouzid on February 14th. The attack started at dawn. German armor came from 2 directions, bypassing American infantry positions on 3 isolated hills. The infantry could not support each other. They were too far apart. The Germans surrounded them, cut them off, and moved on to the American armor in the valley. Combat Command A had tanks at Sidi Bouzid. The unit had trained on tank maneuvers and coordinated armor tactics. The commanders knew what they were supposed to do: spread out, use hull-down positions, coordinate with infantry and artillery. The problem was that American tank doctrine in February 1943 was designed to fight other tanks. American doctrine said tanks should seek out enemy tanks and destroy them in tank-to-tank combat. Infantry would handle enemy infantry. Artillery would suppress enemy guns. Tank destroyers would defend against enemy armor breakthroughs. The Germans did not fight that way. German doctrine integrated everything. Their tanks worked with their infantry. Their infantry worked with their artillery. Their artillery worked with their tanks. They moved together, fought together, and supported each other continuously. At Sidi Bouzid, American tanks fought alone. The infantry was on the hills. The artillery was behind the infantry. The tank destroyers were distributed among the infantry positions. When the German attack came, nothing worked together. The German 21st Panzer Division hit from the north. The Italian Centauro Division hit from the south. They coordinated their movements, converged on the American tanks, and caught them between 2 fires. Combat Command A fought for 4 hours. They knocked out maybe 12 German tanks. They lost 57 Shermans. By noon, commanders were ordering a retreat. By 1400 hours, the unit had ceased to exist as an effective fighting force. The Americans tried to counterattack the next day. Combat Command C came up from the south with 60 tanks. German anti-tank guns hidden in wadis destroyed them at ranges up to 2,000 yards. The American tanks never saw what hit them. Crews bailed out, ran for cover, and left their vehicles burning. By February 16th, the Americans had lost nearly 100 tanks in 2 days. Rommel watched the battle from a command post near Sidi Bouzid. He saw American tanks advancing without infantry support. He saw American artillery firing from static positions that German observers could easily locate. He saw American infantry isolated on hilltops with no route of retreat. He dictated a report to his staff describing American tactical errors in detail. His conclusion was blunt. The Americans would need at least 6 months of combat experience before they could fight effectively against German forces.
The second American disaster happened at Spatla on February 17th. Major General Orlando Ward commanded the 1st Armored Division. Ward was 51 years old, West Point class of 1914. He had served in France during World War I. He had commanded armor for 2 years. He was competent, careful, and methodical. Methodical was the wrong approach. Rommel moved too fast. By the time Ward positioned his forces at Spatla, German armor was already flanking the town from 2 directions. Ward ordered a fighting withdrawal. The withdrawal became a rout. American vehicles jammed the roads heading west. German artillery caught them in column, destroyed trucks and half-tracks, and killed drivers who abandoned vehicles and ran. One American officer later described it as chaos. Men did not know where their units were. Officers did not know where the Germans were. Communications broke down completely. Ward lost another 40 tanks at Spatla. He lost 29 artillery pieces. He lost 57 half-tracks. He lost organized cohesion. By nightfall on February 17th, the 1st Armored Division had been in combat for 4 days and had lost half its equipment. Survivors fell back to Kasserine Pass, 30 miles west, the last defensive position before Tebessa. Rommel pursued. On February 19th at 0450 hours, Rommel attacked Kasserine Pass with the Afrika Korps assault group from the south and elements of the 21st Panzer Division towards Sbiba to the north. His plan was to break through both passes, converge on Tebessa from 2 directions, capture the supply base, and destroy what remained of the American II Corps. The defense at Kasserine Pass fell to Colonel Alexander Stark. Stark commanded the 26th Infantry Regiment, a unit that had landed in North Africa 3 months earlier and had seen almost no combat. Stark had engineering troops, a few artillery batteries, some tank destroyers, and a battalion of French colonial infantry with old French 75mm guns from World War I. Stark positioned his troops on the heights overlooking the pass. The pass itself was 2 miles wide, a gap in the Grand Dorsal mountain chain. The road through it led directly west to Tebessa. If the Germans broke through, they would be on open ground, with nothing between them and the supply base. The German attack came in waves. First came Stuka dive bombers, then artillery, then tanks and mechanized infantry moving up the valley floor. The French 75mm guns opened fire at 4,000 yards. They were old weapons, cast in 1917, but they still worked. German tanks took hits, stopped, and burned. The first attack stalled. Rommel came forward personally. He found his commanders moving too slowly, too cautiously. He ordered them to attack more aggressively, bring up more artillery, commit the reserves, push harder. On February 20th, the Germans attacked again with twice as many tanks. They brought up 88mm anti-aircraft guns and used them in direct fire mode against American positions on the hills. The 88s could penetrate any American tank at 2,000 yards. They could destroy bunkers. They could kill infantry in foxholes. The Americans had nothing that could match their range and hitting power. By mid-afternoon on February 20th, German infantry had infiltrated the heights on both sides of the pass. American positions became untenable. Stark ordered a withdrawal. His troops pulled back 6 miles to a secondary position near the town of Thala. The Germans controlled Kasserine Pass. The road to Tebessa was open.
The valley ran roughly north to south. German forces approaching from Kasserine Pass would have to cross open ground to reach American positions. The valley floor was flat, offering no concealment for attacking forces. But the valley edges had wadis, shallow depressions in the ground, perfect for hiding tanks hull down. American tanks could sit in these wadis with only their turrets exposed, presenting minimal targets while maintaining clear fields of fire across the valley floor. The valley sides had ridge lines that provided excellent observation. Forward observers positioned on these ridges could see for miles. They could observe German assembly areas and call in artillery fire before attacks even began. The ridgelines also provided positions for infantry. American infantry on the ridges could cover the tank positions with rifle and machine gun fire, preventing German infantry from infiltrating close enough to attack the tanks with grenades or demolition charges. There were defiles that would channel any German attack into predictable routes. The Germans would have limited options for maneuver. They would have to come across the valley floor or attempt flanking movements through narrow passes. Either approach would expose them to concentrated American fire. Robinette could position his forces to cover all likely avenues of approach. Robinette positioned his tanks in defilade, hull down in wadis where only their turrets showed. This reduced their exposure to German fire while maintaining their ability to engage enemy targets. The M4 Sherman tank had a low silhouette when hull down. German gunners would have difficulty hitting them at range, but the Shermans could fire effectively. Their 75mm guns had adequate range and hitting power against German tanks at normal engagement distances. He positioned his tank destroyers forward as an outpost line. The M3 half-tracks with 75mm guns were vulnerable in direct combat. They had thin armor. A German shell would penetrate easily, but positioned forward in concealed positions, they could engage German tanks at first contact, disrupt German formations, and force the Germans to deploy prematurely. Then the tank destroyers could withdraw to secondary positions while the hidden Shermans engaged.
Robinette positioned his artillery in depth, with pre-registered fire zones covering every likely avenue of approach. The artillery included 11 batteries totaling over 60 guns. Most were 105mm howitzers, standard American divisional artillery. They had good range, good accuracy, and good hitting power against both armored and soft targets. Properly coordinated, they could deliver devastating firepower. Robinette worked with his artillery commander to establish pre-registered concentrations. They identified locations where German forces would likely assemble, approach routes they would probably use, and positions where they might establish support weapons. Each location received a concentration number. When forward observers called for fire on a specific concentration, every battery knew exactly where to aim. The shells would arrive quickly, accurately, and in volume. He positioned his infantry on the flanks with clear fields of fire. The infantry came from the 1st Infantry Division, Terry Allen's command. They were experienced soldiers. They had fought in North Africa for 3 months. They knew how to dig foxholes, establish firing positions, and coordinate with supporting arms. Robinette placed them where they could cover the tank positions, protect the artillery from infiltration, and seal off the flanks against German attempts to envelop the defense. Most importantly, he coordinated everything. He held a commander's conference on the evening of February 20th. Every battalion commander, every company commander attended. He showed them a map of the defensive position. He explained how each unit fit into the overall plan. He showed the tank commanders where the tank destroyers would be. He showed the infantry commanders where the tanks would be. He showed everyone where the artillery observers would be positioned and how to call for fire. He established communication procedures. Every unit had radio contact with every other unit. If the Germans attacked anywhere, everyone would know immediately. If one unit needed support, help could arrive quickly.
If artillery was needed, observers could call it in within minutes. The entire defensive position functioned as a single, integrated system. Robinette worked through the night of February 20th. His units were exhausted. They had been retreating for 6 days. They had watched other units get destroyed. They had low confidence. He walked among them, talked to platoon leaders and company commanders, explained the defensive plan, and showed them how the position would work. He told them that Germans would come, probably at dawn, probably with tanks leading. He told them to hold their positions, trust the plan, and fight as a team.
At 0450 on February 21st, German reconnaissance elements probed the American position. They reported back to Rommel that Americans were dug in along the valley in significant strength. Rommel decided to attack anyway. He had momentum. He had veteran troops. He believed the Americans would break like they had broken everywhere else. He was wrong. The German attack came at 10,000 hours on February 21st. 40 panzers from the 10th Panzer Division advanced up the valley floor with Italian Bersaglieri infantry in trucks behind them. They expected to find disorganized Americans retreating in panic like every other engagement. Instead, they found a coordinated defensive position. American tank destroyers engaged from the forward line at 1,500 yards. German tanks took hits, stopped, some burned. The panzers returned fire, knocked out several tank destroyers, and kept advancing. The tank destroyers fell back to secondary positions. Then the hidden Shermans opened fire from hold-down positions in the wadis. The Germans had not seen them. Suddenly, they were taking fire from 3 directions. More tanks were hit. More vehicles stopped. The Italian trucks carrying infantry tried to maneuver off the road. American artillery started falling, pre-registered fire. Forward observers had called in concentrations. Shells landed among the trucks, destroyed them, and killed infantry. The German attack stalled. Rommel came forward personally to assess the situation. He could see American positions clearly now. They were not retreating. They were not panicking. They were fighting from prepared positions with coordinated fire. His casualties were mounting. His fuel situation was critical. His ammunition was running low. He ordered another attack the next morning, February 22nd. Same axis, more force. Bring up everything available. Break through to Tebessa.
The attack on February 22nd hit at 10:25 hours after delays caused by fog. German tanks and Italian infantry pushed up the valley again. Again, they met coordinated American resistance. Tank destroyers, tanks in defilade, artillery fire, infantry with anti-tank weapons. The Germans made some progress, reaching within 2 miles of the American artillery positions. Then, American artillery opened up with massed fire. 11 batteries, 132 guns, all firing on pre-registered coordinates. The valley floor became a killing zone. German tanks took direct hits. Infantry in the open were cut down by shrapnel. Italian Bersaglieri units were decimated. 2 battalions were effectively destroyed in 30 minutes of sustained bombardment. German forward momentum stopped. Rommel watched from his command post. He could see his attack falling apart. He could see casualties mounting. He received reports that Montgomery's 8th Army had reached the Meroth Line to the south, threatening his rear. He received reports that Allied reinforcements were arriving hourly at the passes. At 1600 hours on February 22nd, Rommel made his decision. He ordered a withdrawal. All units pull back through Kasserine Pass, return to starting positions. The offensive was over. The Germans withdrew through February 23rd and 24th. American and British forces reoccupied Kasserine Pass on February 25th. The battle was finished. American casualties totaled 6,600 men killed, wounded, or captured. They lost 183 tanks, 104 half-tracks, 208 artillery pieces, and 512 vehicles. It was the worst American defeat in North Africa. But it was not the defeat Rommel expected. In his journal after the battle, he wrote something that surprised his staff. The tactical conduct of the American defense had been first class. The Americans had recovered quickly after the first shock and had succeeded in damming up the German advance by grouping their reserves to defend the passes. They had positioned their artillery skillfully. They had employed combined arms effectively once they established proper defensive positions. This was not the assessment of an easy enemy. This was respect.
What Rommel saw at the end of Kasserine Pass changed his opinion of American forces fundamentally. The early battles at Sidi Bouzid and Spatla had shown him poorly coordinated American attacks and disorganized withdrawals. But the defensive stand east of Tebessa, the artillery fire on February 21st and 22nd, the coordinated combined arms defense, that showed him something different. That showed him Americans could learn fast. That showed him Americans could adapt. That showed him Americans, properly led and properly positioned, could fight. Other German commanders missed this. They saw the first 3 days, the chaos, the retreats, the captured equipment. They concluded Americans were weak. That conclusion would cost them dearly later. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, Rommel's superior, believed the Kasserine victory proved German forces could defeat Americans easily. He advocated for continued defensive operations in Tunisia. Most German staff officers agreed with Kesselring. They looked at the statistics: over 6,000 American casualties, nearly 200 tanks destroyed, thousands of prisoners captured. They saw overwhelming German victory. Rommel saw the whole battle. He saw the first 3 days. He also saw the last 2. He saw how quickly Americans stabilized. He saw how effectively they used artillery once they established proper fire direction. He saw how well they fought from prepared positions with clear fields of fire and coordinated support. Most importantly, he saw the speed of adaptation. From chaos at Sidi Bouzid on February 14th to effective defense at Tebessa on February 21st, 7 days. That speed of learning was unprecedented in Rommel's experience. The British had taken months to adapt after early defeats in North Africa. The French had never adapted after their defeat in 1940. The Italians had struggled with adaptation throughout the war. But the Americans had learned critical lessons in 1 week of combat. That worried Rommel more than any tactical victory could satisfy him. He wrote a second assessment 2 weeks after the battle. In it, he warned German High Command not to underestimate American forces. Americans had superior equipment, superior logistics, superior numbers. What they lacked was experience, but they were gaining experience rapidly. Each battle taught them lessons. They adapted faster than British forces had. Within a few months, Rommel predicted American forces would be formidable opponents. German High Command ignored this assessment. Hitler and his staff believed the early Kasserine reports. Americans were weak, poorly led, would collapse under pressure. This belief shaped German strategy for the rest of the North African campaign. It also shaped German expectations for future campaigns in Sicily and Italy. The belief was wrong. Rommel knew it was wrong. He had seen the evidence.
The battle had taught the Americans critical lessons. First lesson, combined arms coordination. American forces learned that tanks, infantry, and artillery had to work together continuously. Splitting them into separate task forces weakened everyone. Tanks without infantry support were vulnerable to infiltration. Infantry without tank support lacked mobile firepower. Artillery without forward observers could not respond to changing tactical situations. Everything had to work as an integrated system. Second lesson, proper positioning. Defensive positions needed mutual support, clear fields of fire, and routes of withdrawal. Isolated positions got surrounded and destroyed. The infantry battalions on the hills at Sidi Bouzid had been too far apart to support each other. German armor had bypassed them, cut them off, and left them irrelevant to the battle. Proper positioning meant units close enough to provide covering fire with overlapping fields of observation able to reinforce each other quickly. Third lesson, artillery effectiveness. American artillery, properly coordinated with forward observers and pre-registered fire, was devastating. It could stop German attacks cold. At Tebessa, American artillery had fired over 9,000 rounds on February 21st and 22nd. That weight of fire had destroyed German tank formations, disrupted infantry attacks, and forced Rommel to withdraw. The artillery had proven to be the most effective weapon system Americans possessed, but it required proper coordination. Forward observers needed to be positioned where they could see. Fire direction centers needed accurate maps in communication with observers. Artillery batteries needed to be positioned with good fields of fire and protected from counterfire. Fourth lesson, leadership matters. The early disasters at Sidi Bouzid and Subaitla happened under confused command structures. Major General Lloyd Fredendall had split the 1st Armored Division into multiple command commands, given them separate missions, and failed to coordinate their actions. The successful defense east of Tebessa happened under clear command, with officers who understood their sectors and could coordinate their units. Robinette had unified command of Combat Command B. He knew every unit under his control. He knew the terrain. He knew his mission. That clarity enabled effective action. Fifth lesson, preparation beats improvisation. The early American responses were improvised, hasty, and poorly thought through. Units were committed piecemeal without reconnaissance or coordination. The later responses were deliberate, carefully planned, and rehearsed. Robinette had spent 2 days positioning his forces at Tebessa. He had studied the ground. He had positioned every unit deliberately. He had rehearsed fire missions with his artillery. That preparation made the difference between defeat and victory.
American commanders took these lessons seriously. Major General Lloyd Fredendall, who commanded 2nd Corps during Kasserine, was relieved. On March 6th, Major General George Patton replaced him. Patton immediately instituted aggressive training and rigid discipline. He required all officers to know their units, know their sectors, and know their supporting relationships. He required units to practice combined arms coordination daily. Patton's first action was to establish accountability. He inspected every unit in 2nd Corps personally. He asked commanders about their missions, their units, their supporting fires. If commanders could not answer immediately, Patton relieved them on the spot. Within 2 weeks, every battalion commander in 2nd Corps knew exactly what was expected. Clarity replaced confusion. His second action was to enforce standards. He required proper uniforms, clean weapons, and military discipline. Soldiers who had grown sloppy during the retreat were brought back to standard. Patton believed discipline in garrison led to effectiveness in combat. He was correct. Units that maintain standards in small things maintain standards in combat. Patton's third action was to rebuild confidence. He visited forward positions daily. He talked to soldiers. He asked about their equipment, their training, their morale. He listened to their concerns. He made changes based on what he heard. Soldiers saw that leadership cared about their welfare and their survival. Morale improved rapidly. His fourth action was to fix tactical problems. He required defensive positions to be properly sited with mutual support and clear fire plans. He required infantry and tanks to train together until they understood how to support each other. He required artillery forward observers to work with every maneuver unit so they understood how to call for fire effectively. He required tank destroyers to practice ambush tactics from concealed positions, rather than fighting tanks head-to-head. His fifth action was to prepare for offense. Kasserine had been defensive, but Patton knew 2nd Corps would need to attack. He required units to practice assault tactics, movement to contact, and breakthrough operations. He required logistics units to practice rapid resupply during mobile operations. He required engineers to practice clearing mines and building bridges under fire. Everything was rehearsed repeatedly until it became automatic. The results showed immediately. American operations resumed in mid-March 1943 with a methodical advance toward the eastern dorsal. On March 17th, 2nd Corps launched an offensive toward Gafsa. Patton's forces moved with coordinated combined arms. Infantry secured high ground while tanks provided mobile firepower.
Artillery prepared each objective before troops advanced. Engineers cleared mines and improved roads for supply vehicles. The capture of Gafsa on March 17th was unopposed. German forces had withdrawn eastward. But Patton did not pause. He pushed Second Corps forward immediately. On March 18th, American forces secured El Getar, an oasis town 30 miles east of Gafsa. The 1st Infantry Division, under Major General Terry Allen, established defensive positions in the hills surrounding the oasis. The Germans counterattacked on March 23rd. The 10th Panzer Division, the same unit that had smashed American forces at Sidi Bouzid 5 weeks earlier, came west with 50 panzers and mechanized infantry. They expected to drive the Americans back like they had done in February. They were wrong.
American artillery opened fire at maximum range. Forward observers positioned in the hills had clear fields of observation across the valley approaches. They called in concentrations on German assembly areas before the panzers even began their attack. Shells fell among the tanks. Some were hit, others were forced to maneuver. The attack lost cohesion before it started. The panzers came forward anyway. They advanced across open ground toward American positions. American tank destroyers positioned hull down on reverse slopes engaged at 1,500 yards. The tank destroyers were the same M3 half-tracks with 75mm guns that had failed at Sidi Bouzid, but now they were properly positioned with clear fields of fire and infantry support on their flanks. They knocked out German tanks systematically. 28 panzers destroyed in 4 hours of fighting. The German attack broke apart. Some tanks withdrew. Others tried to flank the American position. American artillery shifted fire to interdict the flanking movement. More German tanks were hit. The attack stalled completely. By evening on March 23rd, the 10th Panzer Division had withdrawn with heavy losses. The Americans held El Getar. This was the first time American forces had decisively defeated a German armored counterattack. The difference from Sidi Bouzid was stark. Same German division, same American equipment, but completely different outcome. The change was leadership, training, and preparation. Patton had spent 4 weeks rebuilding Second Corps. The results were visible on the battlefield. The Germans attacked El Getar again over the following week. Each attack failed. American defensive positions were too strong. American artillery was too effective. American infantry and armor worked together too well. By early April, German forces in southern Tunisia were retreating eastward toward their final defensive lines. Rommel did not command at El Getar. He had been evacuated to Germany on March 9th for medical treatment. But he heard the reports. American artillery devastated German armor. American defensive positions were properly coordinated. American forces held against everything the Germans threw at them. This was exactly what he had predicted. The Americans in March 1943 were not the same Americans from February. They had learned, they had adapted. They had taken the lessons from Kasserine and applied them systematically. Patton had rebuilt Second Corps into an effective fighting force in 30 days. Rommel understood this faster than any other German commander. He understood it because he had seen the transition happen in real time during the Kasserine battle. He had seen Americans break at Sidi Bouzid, panic at Sbeitla, then stabilize and fight effectively east of Tebessa. The difference was not in the soldiers, it was in the leadership and the preparation. American soldiers, properly led and properly positioned, fought as well as anyone. This understanding shaped Rommel's later assessments of Allied capabilities. When he returned to Europe and took command of Army Group B in France in late 1943, he repeatedly warned Hitler that Allied forces, particularly American forces, should not be underestimated. He argued that Germany's only chance in Normandy was to defeat the invasion at the beaches before Allied forces could build up strength inland. Once established, properly supplied Allied forces with their superior equipment and artillery would be impossible to dislodge. Rommel's strategic assessment was based on mathematics and logistics, not mystical beliefs about German superiority. He calculated that Allied production outweighed German production by factors of 5 to 1 or 10 to 1, depending on the weapon system. American factories were producing tanks, aircraft, and artillery at rates German factories could never match. American logistics were bringing those weapons across the Atlantic Ocean despite German submarines. American training systems were producing competent soldiers faster than German casualties could be replaced. The combination was insurmountable. German tactical superiority could win battles, it could not win the war. The only German hope was to prevent Allied forces from establishing themselves in Europe. Once established with their full logistical support, they would grind Germany down through sheer weight of material. Rommel had seen this process beginning at Kasserine. American forces had poor tactics in February, but they had excellent equipment, excellent logistics, and they learned fast. By March, they had improved tactics. By May, they were winning consistently. That trajectory would continue.
Hitler ignored these warnings. Most German generals ignored these warnings. They believed the myth of German tactical superiority. They believed Allied forces, particularly American forces, were soft, inexperienced, and poorly led. They pointed to Kasserine as evidence. They remembered the American tanks burning at Sidi Bouzid. They remembered American prisoners being marched through Tunisian villages. They remembered the chaos of the American retreat. They forgot the last 2 days of the battle. Rommel pointed to Kasserine as evidence of the opposite. Americans at Kasserine had their first battle, took massive losses, learned from those losses, and adapted within 72 hours. That adaptation prevented Rommel from achieving his objectives. That adaptation stopped the Africa Corps at the gates of Tebessa. That adaptation, multiplied across an entire army, would eventually overwhelm Germany completely. The key moment in Rommel's reassessment came on February 21st at 1000 hours, when he watched the German attack stall in the Bushepka Valley. He'd expected to see Americans retreating in disorder, like they had retreated everywhere else. Instead, he saw organized defensive fire. He saw coordinated artillery. He saw tanks fighting from prepared positions. He saw a combined arms defense that matched anything British forces had done. He immediately understood what this meant. Americans at Kasserine had their first battle, took massive losses, learned from those losses, and adapted within 72 hours. That adaptation prevented Rommel from achieving his objectives. That adaptation stopped the Africa Corps at the gates of Tebessa. That adaptation, multiplied across an entire army, would eventually overwhelm Germany completely. Rommel expressed this view to his staff on February 23rd as they prepared to withdraw. The Americans had taken their beating and would come back stronger. The Germans had won the battle, but lost the larger opportunity. They should have destroyed Second Corps completely in the first 3 days. They had not. Now Second Corps would rebuild, learn, and improve. The next time they met, the Americans would be far more dangerous. His staff did not understand. They saw the captured equipment, the prisoner counts, the territory gained. They saw victory. Rommel saw missed opportunity and future threat. The historical record proves Rommel right. American forces in North Africa improved dramatically after Kasserine. By April, they were holding their own against German attacks. By May, they were leading offensives. By May 13th, when Axis forces in Tunisia surrendered, American forces had evolved into competent, effective combat units. The same pattern repeated in Sicily in July 1943. Initial American difficulties, rapid adaptation, eventual success. Again in Italy in September 1943. Initial setbacks, quick learning, steady advance. By June 1944, when Allied forces landed in Normandy, American units were among the most effective forces in the European theater. Rommel never fought Americans again after Kasserine. He left North Africa in March, spent some time in Italy, then moved to France to prepare defenses against the expected invasion. But his experience at Kasserine informed his strategic thinking for the rest of the war. He knew what Allied forces properly equipped and properly led could accomplish. He knew Germany's only chance was to prevent them from establishing a foothold. Once established, they would be unstoppable.
On June 6, 1944, Allied forces landed at Normandy. Rommel was not at his headquarters. He was in Germany celebrating his wife's birthday.
By the time he returned on June 7th, Allied forces had established their beachhead. By June 10th, they had landed over 300,000 troops and were pushing inland. Rommel immediately recognized the situation. The Allies were established, they would build up strength. Germany could not stop them, the war was lost. He was injured on July 17th when Allied aircraft strafed his staff car. He was recovering when he was implicated in the July 20th plot to assassinate Hitler. Given the choice between a trial and suicide, he chose suicide on October 14, 1944. He was 52 years old. His assessment of American forces, written after Kasserine and refined over the following year, remained in German military archives. Historians found it decades later. It stands as one of the most accurate early evaluations of American military potential in World War II. Paul Robinette survived the war. His defensive stand east of Tebessa on February 21st was officially credited with stopping the German advance and saving Tebessa. He was wounded on May 5, 1943, when German artillery hit his jeep. His left leg was severely damaged. He was evacuated to the United States and retired from combat operations. He later commanded the Armored School at Fort Knox until the end of the war. Robinette never received widespread recognition for his role at Kasserine. The battle was remembered as an American defeat. The early disasters at Sidi Bouzid and Espaidla dominated the historical narrative. The successful defensive stand that stopped Rommel was overshadowed by the earlier losses. But Robinette knew what he had accomplished. His careful preparation, his coordination of combined arms, his deliberate defensive positioning, these had stopped the Desert Fox at the moment when German victory seemed inevitable. He had shown that Americans, properly led and properly prepared, could defeat German forces on equal terms. George Patton knew it too. When he took command of 2nd Corps in March, he met with Robinette and asked for detailed debriefs on the defensive actions east of Tebessa. Patton used those lessons to rebuild 2nd Corps. Everything Robinette had done, the combined arms coordination, the artillery preparation, the defensive positioning, Patton made standard practice across the entire Corps. By May 3, 1943, 2nd Corps was a different force. They advanced across Tunisia, fought through German defensive lines, and captured thousands of prisoners. On May 7th, they entered Bizerte. On May 13th, all Axis forces in North Africa surrendered. Total prisoners captured? 275,000 German and Italian soldiers, more than were captured at Stalingrad. The transformation took 12 weeks, from the disaster at Kasserine in mid-February to total victory in mid-May. 12 weeks of learning, adapting, training, and fighting. 12 weeks that proved Rommel's assessment correct. American forces were not inferior to German forces, they were inexperienced. Experience could be gained. Lessons could be learned. Mistakes could be corrected. The speed of that learning process determined outcomes. At Kasserine, Americans learned in 72 hours. At Sidi Bouzid and Espaidla, they fought poorly. East of Tebessa, they fought well. That transition, compressed into 3 days of combat, showed what American forces were capable of when properly led. Rommel saw this. Most German commanders did not. That difference in perception shaped how different commanders approached the war. Rommel advocated for realistic assessments and defensive strategies based on Germany's deteriorating strategic position. Other commanders advocated for offensive operations based on assumed German superiority. The offensive approach failed repeatedly, in Tunisia, in Sicily, in Italy, in France. German forces attacking well-prepared Allied positions suffered heavy casualties and gained little. The defensive approach worked better, but could not change the strategic situation. Germany lacked the resources to defeat the combined Allied forces regardless of tactics. By early 1944, Rommel had concluded the war was unwinnable. His experience at Kasserine had taught him that Allied forces, once established and properly supplied, could not be defeated by tactical superiority alone. Germany needed a political settlement. Germany would not get a political settlement.
Therefore, Germany would lose. He was correct, but his correctness changed nothing. Germany fought on until May 1945. Millions more died, cities were destroyed, Europe was devastated. All of it might have been prevented with realistic assessments.
In 1943, Kasserine Pass was one of those moments where reality became visible. The early battles showed American weaknesses. The later battles showed American strengths. Rommel saw both. He understood what the combination meant. He tried to warn his superiors. They did not listen. That is how military failure happens, not through lack of courage or skill, but through false assessment and wishful thinking. German commanders in 1943 wanted to believe Allied forces were weak. Some evidence supported that belief: the disaster at Sidi Bouzid, the chaos at Spatla, the early breakthrough at Kasserine Pass. But other evidence contradicted it: the defensive stand east of Tebessa, the artillery fire that stopped German attacks, the rapid American adaptation. Rommel weighed all the evidence. He concluded the contradictory evidence was more important than the supporting evidence. Americans could learn. Americans could adapt. Therefore, Americans would eventually win. That conclusion was unpopular. It was also accurate. The Battle of Kasserine Pass ended 81 years ago. Historians still debate its significance. Some emphasize the American defeat, the casualties, the captured equipment. Others emphasize the lessons learned, the rapid adaptation, the successful defensive actions that stopped Rommel short of his objectives. Both perspectives are partially correct. Kasserine was a defeat. Americans lost more men, more equipment, more ground than the Germans. But Kasserine was also a learning experience. Americans figured out combined arms coordination under fire. They figured out artillery effectiveness. They figured out defensive positioning. They applied those lessons immediately. Rommel understood that paradox. You can lose a battle and learn enough to win the war. You can win a battle and miss strategic realities that guarantee eventual defeat. Kasserine was both simultaneously: an American tactical defeat that became a strategic lesson, a German tactical victory that revealed American potential. The field where Paul Robinett positioned his defense on February 21st is empty farmland now. No markers, no monuments. The wadis where he hid his tanks are still there. The ridge lines where his artillery observers called in fire are still there. The valley floor where German panzers were destroyed is still there. But nothing marks what happened. Most people driving through do not know a battle was fought there. Rommel's headquarters at Kasserine is gone. The pass itself is now a modern highway. Tourists drive through without knowing its history. The hills where American and German soldiers fought are quiet. But the lessons remain. Proper preparation matters. Combined arms coordination matters. Leadership matters. Realistic assessment matters. These lessons, learned at great cost in February 1943, shaped how American forces fought for the rest of the war. Rommel learned those lessons too. He learned that American forces, written off as inexperienced and incompetent by most German commanders, were actually dangerous opponents who learned fast and adapted quickly. He tried to communicate that lesson. History shows whether anyone listened. Understanding the paradox. The key moment in Rommel's reassessment came on February 21st at 10 a.m. when he watched the German attack stall in the Bushebka Valley. He had expected to see Americans retreating in disorder. Instead, he saw organized defensive fire, coordinated artillery, and tanks fighting from prepared positions. He immediately understood what this meant. Americans had not lost their cohesion or their will to fight. They had fallen back, regrouped, learned, and adapted. That kind of resilience, combined with American industrial strength and logistical superiority, would eventually decide the war. On February 23, as they prepared to withdraw, Rommel told his staff the Americans had taken their beating and would come back stronger. His staff saw victory. Rommel saw the future. Final reflections. Military history is full of moments where perception diverges from reality. Kasserine Pass was one of those moments. What looked like decisive German victory to most observers was actually the beginning of American ascendancy in North Africa. The Americans lost the battle, but they won the education. Within 12 weeks, they transformed defeat into victory. Within 12 months, they became one of the most effective military forces in the world. That transformation began in the Wadis east of Tebessa on February 21, 1943, when Paul Robinet's carefully prepared defense stopped Erwin Rommel's advance and proved that Americans, properly led and properly prepared, could fight.